The following is a summary of the Sicha of Shabbos Sicha Shelach Hey Tov Nun. There is a connection between this Shabbos and Matan Torah because this Shabbos is the last Shabbos of Chodesh Sivan, Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz. And it's the third Shabbos after Matan Torah. And as we know, Matan Torah is connected with the number 3. It was an Oirion Telisoi, La'ama Telisoi. It was a Torah of 3 parts given to a third one. Big connection between number 3 and Matan Torah. So this is the third Shabbos after Matan Torah, and it's still within the month of Sivan, the month of Matan Torah. So we really need to understand what is the connection between Parsha Shelach and Matan Torah. And that connection becomes quite difficult in the light of the following. Torah, as we know, is Torah Oir. It's a Hoirah Berura. It's a clear directive. How does that fit in with the concept of Shalach Lecha, when Hashem says to Moshe, Shalach Lecha, send spies, Ledatcha, if that's what you want to do. If you think it's a good thing to do, you send the spies. In other words, Hashem didn't command Moshe to send the spies. He told him, if you want to do it, you can do it. That's not a clear directive. Furthermore, the sending of the Meraglim, of the spies, caused tremendous destruction, sin and exile, the people staying in the desert. Seemingly, that's the exact opposite of what transpired at Matan Torah, that Poscha Zu HaMosam, that all the negative was swept away and they were completely pristine at the time of Matan Torah. In fact, it says they were called Al Tikra Choros, don't read engraved on the luchas, but read Cheiros, because Ein Lecha Ben Cheira Nela Mishoitze B'Talmud Torah. There's no free person except a person who engages in the Torah. And Chazal say Cheiros also means Cheiros min Goluyos, that if we would engage and keep Torah properly, we would be free of any exile. So seemingly the breaking of the luchos in Chodesh Tammuz and seems to belong to Tammuz, and this story of Shelach seemingly is the opposite of the giving of the Torah, which brings freedom and not exile, which was brought by the sending of the Meraglim. We'll be able to decipher this by understanding the concept of Shelach Lecha in Avodas Hashem, in our Avodah, service of Hashem. Certainly, the sending of spies, since it was done by Moshe Rabbeinu, it was a good thing. Kulam Anoshim, they were all kasherim, they were all kosher at the time that he sent them. In fact, we find in the Haftorah that Yehoshua sent Meraglim, and it was all good. The idea of Shlach Lecha hints to the idea of sending the soul down to this earth in order to make a Dira Lo Yisborach, a dwelling place for Hashem. It has to conquer and enter into the earthly arena. And in order to do that, it needs Losur Es Haaretz. It needs to spy out the land. It needs to think how it can conquer this land. How can it wage war with its corporeality, its physicality, its materialism? And in fact, the days that the spies were sent were Yemei Bikure Anovim, days when the grapes were ripe. A grape is an interesting fruit, in contrast, for example, to a pomegranate, in that you can actually see the seeds within the flesh of the grape. In other words, the pnimius is not hidden by the chitzonius. The internal is revealed within the external. That's the idea of spying out the land, that one needs to see the inner intent of the physical, which is to elevate it into the spiritual. So the days where the grapes are ripe means that even within the Gashmias, they could see the Ruchnius. Now, a precondition to the sending of the soul down to this earth is shlach lecha, l'daitcha. L'daitcha means that there must be an element of where I'm not commanding you to do it, but I'm giving you a place where you need to use your own mind, and there is room to make a mistake. In other words, the shlichus of the person in this world, although they're given clear directives in the Torah, and although they're given enough spiritual power to achieve that shlichus, but nevertheless, there has to be an element of avoda b'koyach atzmoi, of working through it themselves, with their own free choice. With that comes room to err, to make a mistake. And that only reinforces the entity of avoda b'koyach atzmoi, of working through it with one's own power. In fact, this is emphasized in the giving of Torah itself. Torah, at that moment at Sinai, there was the Bitul HaGzeira, the annulment of the decree that the upper worlds should not descend to the lower worlds, and the lower worlds should not ascend to the upper worlds. What happened was, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem came down on Mount Sinai, Moshe Ola El Ho'alakim, and Moshe went up. And although the first move was Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, Hashem's coming down, nevertheless the Shleimus HaAvodah, complete Avodas Hashem, is when Moshe goes up, when there is Avodah from the person themselves, and there is room for mistake. And in fact, that is emphasized at the end of the 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai. We have a klal, a general rule, that ma'alin b'kodesh, you always go up in matters of holiness. And therefore we can appreciate them on the 40th day after Moshe was on Mount Sinai, he had reached the zenith of spiritual elevation. How is it possible that specifically at that moment there was room to make a mistake? Vayar ha'om, the people seeing Kiboishesh Moshe, that Moshe tarried and he didn't come down, and in those few hours they already started serving the egel and there was the smashing of the tablets. The answer is that the ultimate in Avodas Hashem is in an arena where we are doing the Avodah ourselves, and there is room for mistake. The ultimate being that we choose not to make the mistake. But Poyel, when Moshe came down from the mountain, side things kicked in, a mistake was made, and at the end, through the process of Teshuvah, there was the second set of luchos, Kiflayim L'Tushia. The ultimate, however, is to be beset and surrounded by challenge and to negate it, not to make the mistake in the first place. In fact, we have the same concept at the very giving of the Torah by the Aseres HaDibros. Chazal in Gemara Shabbos tell us, Al kol dibur parcha nishmasan. By every one of the 10 commandments, the souls of the Jews flew out. So Chazal asked the question, if by the first dibur, by the first of the commandments, their souls flew out, how did they receive the second commandment? And they answer, because Hashem brought down the dew with which he would resurrect the dead, and he drew their souls back into their bodies. Now, the question is an obvious question. If that was the case, what was the reason that their souls flew out in the first place? So the Mefarshim say it was because of the tremendous tainug, the pleasure, the mesikus, the sweetness, and the arevus, the complete ecstatic feeling of hearing a dibur from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they heard Anoichi, wow, Yotzasa Nishmasan, their neshama went out. And Hashem had to bring tal, lahachiyoses amesim, Hashem had to resurrect them. So what was the additional wow in the second of the Aseres HaDibros that caused them further to expire, and Hashem again had to bring further the Tal? In fact, if we have a look at them, the first of the Aseres HaDibros is a positive, and the second is a negative. The first says, I am Hashem. The second one says, but don't serve any other gods. Seemingly, the positive is much more inspiring than the negative. So why Yotzos on Nishmasim by the second one? The answer is because by Lo Yirlecha, by the second one, there is the opportunity to make a mistake. And in order to ensure that the people would not make that mistake, it was necessary to give them extra koyach. That extra koyach, that extra imbuement and infusion was the reason why by each of the Aseres HaDibros, Yotzos on Nishmasim, because they were getting, in fact, more power in order by each one of them to fulfill their mission. And now we can understand why we read the Parsha of Shelach at the end of the month of Sivan, because as we go further from Matan Torah and we go into the world, we emphasize more and more that the idea of Torah is that it should be in an arena where there is challenge. There needs to be avodah b'koyach atzmai. One needs to work through it and not fall into the trap of making a mistake. So that's the Sachakoil. That's the sum total of the month of Sivan. That as we go out into the world, we do not make that mistake. And in fact, that is how it was by the spies of Yehoshua in the Haftorah. That's also emphasized by the end of Parsha Shelach when we read the Parsha of the Tzitzis. What does it say there? Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzesi aschem me'eretz Mitzrayim. In other words, there needs to be a Yetzias Mitzrayim. That one is in Mitzrayim, Meitzorim u'gvulim, borders and limitations. But nevertheless, one exits those in order not to make the mistake and to do the right thing. This is also emphasized in the beginning of next week's Parsha, in Parshas Koirach, which we read by Mincha. At the beginning of the Parsha, it says, Vayikach Koirach ben Yitzhar ben Levi. Says Rashi, V'lo Yizkir ben Yaakov. It doesn't mention that Koirach was a descendant of Yaakov. Shebikish rachmim alatzmei, because Yaakov Avinu requested mercy for himself, that his name should not be mentioned together with the Meraglim. Says Rashi, and in fact it is mentioned with the Meraglim in Divrei Hayomim, where it's Misyaches Korach on the Duchon, on the platform of the Leviim, and there it says Ben Aviyosef, Ben Korach, Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kos, Ben Levi, Ben Yisrael. So there it mentions he was a descendant of Yisrael. Now, seemingly we need to understand, why does Rashi bring here in Parshas Korach? All Rashi needs to do here in Parshas Korach is explain why his genealogy, his ancestry is not brought back to Yaakov Avinu. Why does Rashi need to bring what it says in Divrei Hayomim? And furthermore, by bringing what it says in Divrei Hayomim, he actually contradicts the whole point of not bringing it over here. The whole point of not bringing it over here is not to mention his name by Korach, and by bringing the pasuk in Divrei Hayom, you are mentioning it. The Shalah explains that there are inyonim nifloim in Pirush Rashi, and here as well, Rashi is out to explain that in fact there was a great milah, there was a great advantage in Korach, and he had great ancestry linked back to Yisrael, not just Yaakov, Yisrael, Kisorisa imalkim imanoshim vatuchel, the idea of prevailing. And in fact, his intention was good. The desire to become a Kohen Gadol was good. Moshe Rabbeinu himself said that, and Afani roitze bekach, I also want to have that level of being a Kohen Gadol. But nevertheless, it was shaloi kefi hakavana. It was not the rotzen of Hashem. In other words, that the ultimate is that a person should possibly have a desire, but then recognize that that's not the Ratzon Hashem. Avoda b'koach atzmai l'datcha. This is also connected with the Pirkei Avos which we read this week. In Perek Shlishi, Mishnah Yudalet, it says that Rabbi Akiva said the following: Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Man is precious because he's born in the image of God. Then it says, Chavivin Yisro shenikru bonim lamakim. Yidden are tired because they are children of Hashem. And then it says, Chavivin Yisro shenitza lehem kli chemda, that Yidden are precious because they were given a great treasure. And then the Mishnah says, Hakoil sofui, everything is foreseen. V'harashus nesuna, freedom of choice is granted. Uvatov ha'olam nidon, the world is judged with goodness. V'hakoil l'fi maisa, and everything is according to the preponderance of good deeds. What is the connection between all of these sayings, and what is the connection with Rabbi Akiva? The answer is, Rabbi Akiva himself was Ben Gerim. He came from converts. And also, there was a 40-year period at the beginning of his life that he never learned Torah. It was only at the age of 40 that he started to learn Torah, and then he had this meteoric rise and became the teacher of the entire Torah. So in fact, we have these three periods. We have the period of when, before the Giur, there was no Judaism. Then we have after the Giur, there was the idea of becoming a Yid. And then there was the period of Limud Torah. Those are in fact the three statements in the Mishnah. It says, Chavim Adam shenivra b'tzelem, man is precious because he's created in the image of God. That includes even a non-Jew, and that was as he was before the state of Giur. Chavivin Yisrael shenikru bonim lamakim, that's as he is a Yid, however he has not yet learned Torah. And then Chavivin Yisrael shenitel hem kli chemda, that's as he was after he learned Torah. And now we understand the Hemshech as it says, Hakol tzafui v'harashus nesuna. Because there is no tzivui, there's no command to convert. The Giur, a conversion, is made midaitoi. It's made because a person wants to become a Yid. It's bottom up. And consequently, it's madgish. It emphasizes the idea of ani eini mesavelecha. I'm not telling you to do it, but there has to be avoda b'koach atzmai. And consequently, as Rabbi Akiva progresses, he's telling us that Hakol Sofi, Horashus Nusuna, permission is given, there's Bechira Chafshis, there's free choice. However, Hakol Masukan Masuda, everything is prepared for the meal, because the ultimate reward is when a person goes through that journey of Ledaitcha, of making the correct choices in this world, Avoda B'Koyach Atzmai. The Hira, the instruction from the above is as follows. Pasha Shlach Lecha is still in Chodesh Sivan, which is connected with the first set of Luchos. In the previous weeks, we've spoken about the idea of Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, raising many students, Shiurei Torah Barabim, establishing many Shiurim in public, each person becoming a Maggid Shir, if possible, to at least 10 other Yidden. And through Limud Torah, Bischus HaMishnayos Miskanses HaGoluyos, in the merit of teaching the halachas, the Goluyos will come back, and they will be brought back to Eretz Yisrael, and through the Shlichus of Talmidim Harbe, there will be fulfilled the Shlichus of Shlach No Bi'ad Tishlach, of the coming of Mashiach. As it says that the Shliach plus 10 equals Mashiach. So each Yid must learn Torah with 10 other Yidden, and that's the concept of Mashiach. In a way of Asara Sheyoshvim V'Oiskim B'Torah, 10 sitting and learning Torah. And especially in Hafotzas hamayonos chutza, which is the concept of Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz, Yud Beis Tammuz, etc. Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher etzeisi eschem hein go'alti eschem shenis, the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, which should take place, takef umiyad mamash.